The small interview room aboard Harmony Prime was sterile and cold. White LED lights beamed down harshly on Commander Jal Aruk's scales, highlighting every scar etched into his green, reptilian skin. 3 years of continuous warfare between the Cathar Planetary Alliance and the Human Coalition had left their mark on the veteran Sarian officer. Across from him sat Dr. Lyra Voss, a human historian appointed by the Galactic Council. Her voice was deep, her eyes tired. A recording device sat between them on the small metal table, its periodic beeps punctuating the psychological battle unfolding in the room. "We need to hear the truth," Dr. Voss began, her pen poised over her notepad. "About the war with the Human Coalition." Jal's scales rippled slightly, a subtle tell of discomfort among his kind. He'd been summoned to tell the whole truth before the Council. Now, as the sole Sarian commander to survive with his reputation somewhat intact, the burden fell to him. 3 years ago, he started, his voice rasping like scales dragging across metal. On the mining planet Asperia 4 in the outer territories of the Human Coalition, we initiated a hasty attack because intelligence reported only a few hundred garrison troops. When our forces landed, just one human battalion held us at bay, and Asperia 4 became a dead world. Dr. Voss noted, just a superior Sarian force with advanced weaponry, yet the result was only a human suicide. Jal fell silent. From this moment, the narrative would unfold through a series of memories, fragments from the life of a Sarian soldier whose faith in his proud race was beginning to crumble. "Let me start from the beginning," he finally said. 3 years earlier, the Sarians believed Kepler 442b would be an easy target. 5,000 elite troops against 200 garrison soldiers and 10,000 civilians, miners, engineers, families. "We surrounded the main colony," Zal recounted, his pupils narrowing at the memory. Major Terran Price appeared alone in the town square. When our troops raised their weapons, he smiled and pressed an emergency button. The commander's claws dug into the metal table. In an instant, all mining facilities, mines, and civilian hideouts exploded simultaneously. 300 Sarian soldiers died, unable to comprehend why anyone would accept such self-destruction. Dr. Voss watched him carefully. "What happened to Price?" "He died in a secure bunker, smiling while taking a sip of coffee. His last words, according to our recovered surveillance, a life of freedom, even for a day, became legend among humans." Jal's scales trembled slightly. "We captured a recording of Price. For 6 months in captivity, he learned our language, practiced deceiving guards, and planted seeds of suffering by offering them one last coffee. Then one night, Sarian Core Station shook as the prison itself exploded, killing 200 guards. So they didn't just fight with explosives," Dr. Voss observed. "No," Zal hissed. "They studied us, modified toxins and biological agents, and dispatched them throughout 500 star systems. The war to protect oil wells and mines immediately transformed into a fiery hell." Dr. Voss made more notes. "What about Asperia 4? You mentioned it earlier." "This time, we didn't repeat our mistake." Jal's voice grew distant. "We issued a surrender invitation before landing troops. We recorded the human capital force evacuating, beginning with the gentle smile of an old woman preparing to offer cookies." "An old woman?" "Abigail Grandma Death Moore, as we later learned. She brought homemade cookies to thank the Sarians for not firing immediately. But the cookies contained toxins. Sarian soldiers collapsed on the floor, unable to stand or fight for 3 days. During that time, Abigail and the residents retreated into the mountains, transforming Asperia 4 into a natural fortress. Though only 7,000 civilians remained, every underground passage, every road, every shelter was booby-trapped." Jal paused, remembering the carnage. "We lost 12,000 lives, including civilians. Our peacekeepers were confused. Should we dethrone General Terran Price? I remained silent, realizing they aren't just vindictive. They transform even civilians, even children, into warriors. How did it end? Dr. Voss asked. Sarians were forced to withdraw. Asperia 4 became a wasteland. Jal's voice hardened. But the echoes of poison cookies and grandma death haunted even our generals. Civilians laugh while killing us. Civilians sing while destroying us. He stared at the recording device, watching the light blink. His scales shifted to a deeper shade of green, a sign of distress among Sarians. The Galactic Council decided to crush the Sol system, the buffer zone between the Central Alliance and Earth. They dispatched 3,000 Sarian vessels, cruisers, destroyers, fighters, divided into multiple clusters, intending to shatter the human defense forces, 400 human ships with at least 5,000 troops. I commanded 200 heavy combat ships, confident of a swift victory. Dr. Voss gestured for him to continue. Everything proceeded smoothly at first. Sarian ships pushed in, opened fire, and we cornered 300 enemy vessels to the north. They were much weaker than us. What changed? When General Morrison sent the coded message, "Remember the Alamo," to their entire formation, 6,000 asteroid fleet units suddenly mobilized. Over 1,200 asteroids, previously appearing as drifting rocks, suddenly charted deliberate flight paths, revealing plasma cannons, nuclear missiles, and Gauss artillery. The Sol Belt became a galactic traffic jam. Jal's eyes narrowed to slits. 50 Sarian ships had their armor torn open. The evacuation route was cut off as enormous asteroids changed course, severing our retreat. Small spacecraft charged in like warhorses. Whenever a Sarian ship was damaged, the human fleet let it drift freely, turning it into a suicide missile. They plowed straight into the center of the Sarian fleet, destroying my command ship. The result: 8 Sarian generals dead, 600 ships heavily damaged. Dr. Voss tapped her pen against the notepad. And the psychological impact? The brutality wasn't in the firepower, but in their willingness to commit suicide. When we destroyed one of their ships, we became haunted knowing it would sink us too. Each victory felt like a poison to our morale. If we defeat them, they will remember and take more vicious revenge. Jal's scales rippled with agitation. Throughout the 3 years, the Human Brain Trust conducted information warfare. They released Sarian prisoners into fake camps, which were actually genetic research facilities. Tell me about General Amy Brooks. Brooks organized a special forces team disguised as Sarian officers to infiltrate our organization's rear, collecting information on ammunition quantities, passwords, supply routes. She allowed herself to be captured 3 times, each time stealing crucial data about Sarian formations, encryption systems, isolation protocols. She turned shackle time into military training, binding herself in prison camps, learning guard routines, memorizing coordinates, contingency plans. After each escape, Brooks sent diaspora manuals to each resistance unit across the galaxy, instructions on breaking locks, camouflage techniques, transmitting information via shortwave. Dr. Voss looked up from her notes. The consequences? Within 6 months, Sarian reconnaissance warriors, scout ships, rescue squadrons were all ambushed. Human spies had infiltrated every Sarian agency, from the War Command to logistics relay stations. As a result, the Sarian fleet had nowhere to hide. Every plan was exposed before activation. The LED lights seemed to grow brighter, highlighting the deep furrows in Jal's battle-worn face. After suffering heavy defeats in the Sol system and losing most of our weapons, we were forced to negotiate on Harmony Prime. We brought a list of demands. The human coalition must surrender unconditionally. And the humans sent Colonel Steve Hayes, former commander, now diplomat. He came to the station unarmed, unprotected. Jal's voice grew quiet, almost reverential in its fear. I entered the main conference room, facing the Sarian Council and allied species citizens. The atmosphere was tense. Sarians expected Hayes to beg. Instead, he opened his briefcase and spilled out images of Sarian palace interiors, secret meetings with the Sarian commander-in-chief, war budgets, diagrams of biological weapons research centers targeting Sarians. Dr. Voss leaned forward. They had spies everywhere? Nurses in hospitals, ministerial assistants, ship assembly engineers, even perimeter guards. Every diagram, every password, every official conversation was in their hands. Zhao's claws scratched against the metal table. They showed live video. Half an hour ago, a special forces team of 10 people cut the power supply on Loris 4, a Sarian ally, plunging 5 cities into darkness, affecting 2 million citizens. The Sarian Council was stunned. But we launched 3,000 ships, used nuclear weapons on the Saturn station. How could just a dozen people? Hayes smiled and said, "We only need one chip, one virus, one group of volunteer heroes. Sarian forces fight heavy battles, but we fight psychological warfare, network warfare, remnant warfare. A battle that doesn't require even 1,000 ships." They displayed maps showing dispersal patterns. Each warship contained just 10 humans, mapping Sarian weaknesses, from storm network control rooms to biological species vulnerable to X-47 virus attacks. The recording device beeped loudly in the silence that followed. When I realized that our traditional strengths, unity, armored shells, large fleets, no longer maintained an advantage, the atmosphere broke in silence. Hayes calmly made a single offer. Zhao's voice dropped to a whisper as he quoted Hayes. "End the war. Humanity doesn't want to dominate anyone. We just want the freedom to survive. We've just demonstrated the ability to defeat any planet, without needing nuclear weapons. If Sarians insist on continuing, we'll bring the war to the heart of Cathar, to the eyes of your children." In that moment of trembling, I understood that I and the entire Sarian race had been completely deceived. 3 years wasn't a border skirmish, but a forensic, geographical, psychological, and biological warfare test designed by humanity. Dr. Voss stopped writing. The silence stretched between them like a physical barrier. The Sarians were forced to grant autonomy to the human coalition. Zhao finally continued. The Galactic Council agreed. Humans were recognized as equal partners in all common security policies. Former Sarian generals had to resign, accountable to the Council for irreparable concession zones to avoid extinction for our race. And inside Sarian territory? Chaos. Sarian soldiers lost direction, no longer believing in strategic plans. Countless humiliations emerged as human coalition troops guarded Sarian bases, laughing casually, as if victory was a joke. I was forced to witness the medical center returning the bodies of comrades, unidentifiable, because humans knew Sarian hideouts so well they could plant mines in every corpse part. Dr. Voss watched him, her face expressionless. "I returned to my homeland, Tarsia," Zhal said, his voice hollow. "Without rank, just a civilian living in a devastated city. Underground tunnels attacked, oil wells poisoned with toxins, every Sarian medical facility implanted with devices to test for DNA mutations." He looked directly at Dr. Voss for the first time since beginning his account. In the final moment, I questioned myself. We asked if humans were strong? Now I see. They aren't the strongest. They just never fear death. The recording device beeped again, marking the passage of time. I journaled to the Council. A warning to other species. Never think that we, Sarians, are the pinnacle of the universe. For there is a species. They don't hesitate to break the universe to protect every rock, every grain of soil. Zhal fell silent, his tale complete. Outside the interview room window, the crimson sunset of Tarsia glowed, like a planet taking its final breath before shattering. He would soon step into the shadows, uncertain of Sarian's future. He knew only one thing for certain. Humanity will continue to forge war as an art. Dr. Voss turned off the recording device. History had been documented. The testimony of a fallen empire would serve as a warning to the rest of the galaxy. Underestimate humans at your peril. The stars outside Harmony Prime continued their ancient dance, indifferent to the rise and fall of civilizations. But somewhere in the vast darkness, humanity prepared, just in case anyone else decided to test their resolve. 3 years before his testimony on Harmony Prime, Commander Jal Aruk had stood on the bridge of the Sarian flagship Dominion's Claw, overlooking the unsuspecting mining colony on Kepler 442b. The red desert planet rotated slowly beneath them, its sprawling industrial complex visible even from orbit. Preliminary scans complete. Commander, reported his second-in-command, Lieutenant Vex. Human defensive capabilities minimal. 200 garrison troops, standard perimeter defenses, no orbital platforms. Jal's scales rippled with satisfaction. And the civilian population? Approximately 10,000, sir, mostly mining personnel and their families. This would be simple, a textbook occupation. The Sarian High Command had selected Kepler 442b as their first target specifically because of its vulnerability and strategic value. The planet's rich titanium deposits would fuel the Sarian war machine for decades to come. Deploy the first wave, Zal ordered. Standard intimidation protocols. I want their surrender within 6 hours. 5,000 Sarian elite troops descended upon Kepler 442b in perfect formation, their dropships creating thunderous sonic booms as they entered the atmosphere. An intentional, psychological tactic. Jal watched from orbit as his forces surrounded the main colony complex, cutting off all escape routes. He expected immediate capitulation. The humans were outgunned, outnumbered, and outmatched in every conceivable way. Their surrender was the only logical outcome. But logic, as Jal would soon learn, played little part in human warfare. Major Terran Price was not what Jal had expected of a human military commander. He was older than most active soldiers, with silver streaking his dark hair and lines etched deeply around his eyes. When he walked alone into the colony's central plaza to meet the Sarian forces, he carried no weapon. "This is foolishness," Lieutenant Vex hissed as they watched the video feed from the surface. One human against 5,000 Sarian warriors? Jal didn't respond. Something about Price's demeanor disturbed him. The human showed no fear as Sarian troops surrounded him, their plasma rifles trained on his unprotected body. "I am Major Terran Price," the human announced, his voice steady. "I speak for the people of Kepler 442b. "Your surrender is accepted," the Sarian ground commander replied through his translator. "Order your people to disarm immediately." Price smiled. It was not the expression of a defeated man. "You misunderstand," he said, reaching slowly into his pocket. "I'm not here to surrender." The Sarian commander raised his weapon. "Halt!" But Price had already withdrawn a small device with a single red button. His thumb hovered over it. "We knew you were coming," he said, still smiling. "We've been preparing for months." He pressed the button. From the safety of orbit, Jal watched in horror as explosions rippled across the entire planet's surface. The mining facilities, processing plants, residential blocks, all detonated in a carefully orchestrated sequence. Secondary explosions followed as stored fuel and munitions caught fire. "What is happening?" Jal demanded, gripping the command console so tightly his claws left indentations in the metal. They're destroying everything," Vex stammered, "including themselves." 300 Sarian troops died in that first wave of explosions, caught unprepared for such an incomprehensible tactic. The remaining forces retreated in disarray, unable to establish a foothold on a planet that was rapidly consuming itself in flames. "Recover the ground forces," Zal ordered. "Immediately!" As the dropships returned to the Dominion's claw, Jal struggled to understand what he had witnessed. Why would the humans destroy their own colony? It represented years of investment, generations of work. It was illogical, insane. Later analysis of recovered surveillance footage revealed Major Price's final moments. He had retreated to a secure bunker deep beneath the colony's administrative building. As the structure collapsed around him, he sat calmly at a desk, sipping from a cup of coffee. His last recorded words, picked up by the bunker's failing systems, would haunt Jal for years to come. A life of freedom, even for a day, is worth more than a century of servitude. The Sarian High Command refused to accept defeat. They captured a prisoner, a wounded communications officer who had failed to reach an evacuation pod. After healing his injuries, Sarians were not without mercy. They began interrogation. This prisoner also bore the name Price, Robert Price, cousin to the major who had denied them Kepler 442b. For 6 months, he was held in a high-security detention facility at Sarian Core, the massive space station that served as the nerve center of Sarian military operations. During his captivity, Price learned the Sarian language with astonishing speed. He befriended his guards, asking questions about their families, their customs, their beliefs. He seemed genuinely interested in Sarian culture. Some guards began to see him not as an enemy, but as a curiosity, perhaps even a friend. The human adapts well. Security Chief Molesque reported to Jal during an inspection tour. He may provide valuable intelligence on human psychology. Jal was less convinced. He is too cooperative. Watch him closely. His warning came too late. 6 months into Price's captivity, during the night cycle when the station operated with minimal staff, a series of explosions tore through the detention level. The security feeds showed Price offering coffee to the guards, a human beverage he had been allowed to prepare as a gesture of cultural exchange. The guards who drank it collapsed within minutes, allowing Price to access the security systems. By the time Jal arrived at the scene, the detention center was a smoking ruin, 200 Sarian guards dead, and Price nowhere to be found. A station-wide search revealed that he had escaped on a maintenance shuttle, disappearing into the vastness of space. How could this happen? Jal demanded of the surviving security personnel. An analysis of the coffee revealed a sophisticated neurotoxin, specifically tailored to Sarian biology. More alarming, the formula appeared to have been developed on the station itself, using medical supplies and common chemicals in innovative combinations. He was studying us, Jal realized with growing horror. The entire time, he was learning our weaknesses. Within weeks, reports began flooding in from across Sarian territory. Outbreaks of mysterious illnesses, affecting only Sarians. Sabotage of military installations. Communication networks compromised. Price had not simply escaped. He had begun a one-man guerrilla war against the entire Sarian Empire. The High Command was forced to admit that they had severely underestimated human resourcefulness. But they remained confident in their overall military superiority. Their next target would be approached with greater caution. But the outcome, they were certain, would be different. They were wrong. Asperia 4 should have been a simple victory. Located in the outer territories of human space, it was primarily an agricultural world with rolling hills, dense forests, and limestone cave systems. Its strategic value was minimal compared to Kepler 442b, but its symbolic importance was significant. The Sarians needed a win after their humiliation. This time, they would not repeat their mistakes. Jal personally developed the invasion strategy, emphasizing psychological warfare. They would offer the humans a chance to surrender before landing troops, demonstrating both mercy and confidence. "We will show them that resistance is futile," he told his officers. "They cannot all be willing to die like the fanatics on Kepler." The Sarian fleet arrived in the Asperia system with overwhelming force. 30 capital ships, hundreds of fighters, and thousands of ground troops. They broadcast their invitation to surrender on all frequencies, along with detailed imagery of their military might. The response came from the planetary governor's office. They would send a representative to discuss terms. Zhao watched from orbit as a small, unarmed shuttle launched from the planet's surface. His sensors indicated a single human occupant, an elderly female, according to the bioscan. "They send an old woman to negotiate?" Lieutenant Vex scoffed. "They do not take us seriously." "Perhaps it is a sign of respect in their culture," Zhao suggested, though he shared his lieutenant's confusion. "Prepare a reception team, but maintain full security protocols." The human shuttle docked with the Dominion's claw. When the airlock opened, a small, white-haired woman stepped through, carrying a covered basket. She wore simple civilian clothes and smiled warmly at the armed Sarian reception party. "Hello, dears," she said through a portable translator. "I'm Abigail Moore. My grandchildren call me Granny, and everyone on Asperia knows me for my cookies." She lifted the cloth covering her basket, revealing several dozen small, round food items. "I brought these as a token of appreciation for not shooting first. Would you care to try one? They're my special recipe." The Sarian security team exchanged glances. Their protocols dictated that they should scan any items brought aboard, but the elderly human seemed so harmless, so fragile. Some of the younger officers, curious about human culture, stepped forward. "They're quite good," Abigail assured them. "Everyone loves my cookies." 20 Sarian officers sampled the cookies. Within hours, they were incapacitated, not dead, but violently ill, unable to perform their duties. The mysterious ailment spread rapidly throughout the flagship as more personnel came into contact with the affected officers. Zhao, who had declined to sample the human food, ordered an immediate quarantine and medical investigation. By then, Abigail Moore had returned to the planet's surface, her mission accomplished. The analysis of the cookies revealed a sophisticated compound that interacted specifically with Sarian biochemistry, causing temporary but debilitating neurological symptoms. More alarmingly, the compound could be transmitted through casual contact, explaining its rapid spread throughout the ship. "How could they develop something so precisely targeted to our biology?" Zhal demanded of his chief medical officer. "They must have been studying us for years," the doctor replied grimly. "This is not improvisation. This is the result of dedicated research." With the flagship's crew largely incapacitated, Zhal was forced to delay the ground invasion. This delay proved catastrophic to the Sarian battle plan. During the 3 days it took for the affected crew members to recover, the human population of Asperia 4 had disappeared from their settlements. When Sarian ground forces finally landed, they found abandoned towns and empty fields. "Where have they gone?" Zal demanded, reviewing the ground team reports. The answer came as Sarian troops began to push into the forested hill country. The first squad disappeared without a trace. The second encountered primitive but lethal traps, pits filled with sharpened stakes, tripwires triggering avalanches, poisoned water sources. The humans had transformed their entire planet into a defensive weapon. Every cave system concealed a resistance cell. Every forest hillside hid snipers. Even the children had been trained to serve as lookouts and messengers. "They fight like animals," Lieutenant Vex complained after another disastrous engagement. "They refuse to meet us in honorable combat." Jal was beginning to understand that human concepts of honor differed fundamentally from Sarian ideals. To the Sarians, warfare was a formalized process with clear rules and protocols. To humans, it was simply about survival, by any means necessary. The campaign for Asperia 4 dragged on for months, becoming a war of attrition that the Sarians had never anticipated. For every human resistance fighter they killed, they lost multiple Sarian troops to ambushes and booby traps. The dense forests and cave systems provided perfect cover for guerrilla tactics, allowing even the civilian population to become effective fighters. Sarian casualties mounted. 5,000, then 8,000, eventually reaching 12,000 dead or wounded, including Sarian civilians who had begun to arrive to establish administrative control over territories that were never truly secured. Throughout it all, the name Grandma Death spread among Sarian troops like a virus of its own. Abigail Moore had become a legend, the harmless-looking old woman whose cookies had humiliated the mighty Sarian fleet. Intelligence reports indicated she was actively leading one of the largest resistance cells, personally designing many of the traps that had proven so effective against Sarian forces. After 9 months of brutal, demoralizing combat, the Sarian High Command finally acknowledged the unthinkable. They could not win on Esperiafu. The cost in lives and resources had become unsustainable, and the psychological impact on Sarian troops was severe. For the first time in centuries, the Sarian Empire was forced to withdraw from a battlefield without victory. As the last Sarian ships departed Esperia's orbit, Jal stood on the bridge of the Dominion's Claw, watching the blue-green planet recede in the viewscreen. The planet appeared peaceful from space, giving no indication of the hell his forces had endured on its surface. "This changes nothing," Lieutenant Vex insisted, standing at attention beside his commander. "They cannot hope to stand against our full might. 2 minor planets mean nothing in the context of galactic war." Jal wasn't so certain. Something fundamental had shifted in his understanding of their adversary. The humans didn't fight like any species the Sarians had encountered before. They didn't respect the normal boundaries of warfare. They turned civilians into soldiers, homes into fortresses, everyday objects into weapons. Most disturbing of all, they seemed willing, even eager, to sacrifice themselves for victory. How could the Sarians fight an enemy that did not fear death? But Jal kept these doubts to himself. The Sarian military did not tolerate questioning of the Empire's inevitable triumph. Instead, he turned his attention to the next campaign, one that would surely demonstrate Sarian superiority once and for all. The Sol system would become the stage for their greatest test. The Galactic Council's decision to target the Sol system marked a significant escalation in the conflict. Located in the buffer zone between the Central Alliance and Earth, Sol represented a strategic choke point for human supply lines. Control of the system would allow the Sarians to isolate Earth from its colonial territories, potentially forcing a human surrender without further bloodshed. Jal was assigned to command a significant portion of the assault force, 200 heavy combat vessels, part of a larger fleet of 3,000 Sarian ships divided into tactical clusters. Against them stood approximately 400 human vessels, with an estimated 5,000 troops, a severely outmatched defense force, according to Sarian intelligence. "The humans have concentrated their forces in the northern quadrant," Jal observed during the final planning session. "They appear to be protecting the asteroid mining operations in that sector." The Sol system was renowned for its dense asteroid belt, rich in rare minerals, essential for spacecraft construction. Hundreds of human mining operations dotted the belt, extracting resources vital to the human war effort. Destroying these facilities was a primary objective of the Sarian campaign. "Their strategy is puzzling," Lieutenant Vex noted. "By clustering their forces, they leave the southern approach virtually undefended. Perhaps they hope to preserve their most valuable mining assets," another officer suggested. "Or they may be planning to withdraw entirely and are simply covering their evacuation." Jal studied the tactical display with unease. After Kepler and Esperia, he had learned to distrust apparent human weakness. But the strategic analysis was sound, and the numerical superiority of the Sarian forces was undeniable. "We proceed as planned," he decided. "Three-pronged attack, main thrust from the south. Drive their fleet against the northern boundary of the asteroid field, where they'll have limited maneuverability." The battle began precisely as Sarian tactical computers had predicted. The human fleet, detecting the approaching Sarian armada, maintained their position in the northern quadrant. Jal's battle group swept in from the south, weapons charged, while additional Sarian forces closed from east and west. "Enemy vessels holding position," the tactical officer reported. "They're making no attempt to escape the encirclement. They have nowhere to go," Vex observed with satisfaction. "The asteroid field at their backs limits their options." Jal watched as the distance closed. The first salvos of long-range weapons fire crossed the void, Sarian energy beams lancing toward human vessels. The humans returned fire, but their weapons seemed to lack the power to penetrate Sarian shields at this range. "Continue advance," Zal ordered. "Maintain formation integrity." For the first hour of the battle, everything proceeded according to plan. The Sarian fleet pushed steadily forward, forcing the human vessels to give ground or be destroyed. Several human ships were disabled by Sarian fire, drifting helplessly in space. "They're being crushed," Vex said, unable to keep the excitement from his voice. "At this rate, we'll have complete control of the system by the end of the day cycle." Jal was about to respond when an urgent communication came through from Sarian intelligence. "Commander, we've intercepted a coded transmission from the human flagship to all their vessels." Message reads, "Remember the Alamo." "Meaning?" Zal demanded. "Unknown, sir. It appears to be a historical reference from human military history." Before Jal could order further analysis, the tactical display erupted with new sensor contacts. Throughout the asteroid field, objects previously identified as simple rocks were suddenly in motion, their signatures changing as hidden propulsion systems activated. "What is happening?" Jal demanded, rising from his command chair. "The asteroids," the sensor officer gasped. They're moving, changing course. I'm detecting weapon systems activating across the field." With growing horror, Jal watched as over 1,200 asteroids, ranging in size from small shuttles to massive capital ships, revealed their true nature. What the Sarians had dismissed as natural formations or mining installations were in fact disguised warships and weapons platforms. Panels slid away from asteroid surfaces, revealing plasma cannons, missile launchers, and Gauss artillery batteries. "It's a trap," Jal realized too late. "All vessels, evasive maneuvers, break formation, maximum thrust." But the Sarian fleet, arrayed in tight battle formation, couldn't react quickly enough. The disguised asteroid ships launched a coordinated attack from all directions, catching the Sarian forces in devastating crossfire. Heavy weapons fire tore through Sarian shields, ripping open armored hulls and venting crews to space. Within minutes, 50 Sarian vessels had suffered critical damage. Jal watched in disbelief as the neat holographic formation of his fleet dissolved into chaos on the tactical display. "Order retreat," he commanded. "All ships, fall back to Rally Point Sigma." "We can't, sir," the navigation officer replied, panic evident in his voice. "The larger asteroids have changed position. They're blocking our withdrawal routes." Trapped between the human fleet to the north and the now hostile asteroid field surrounding them, the Sarian forces found themselves in an impossible tactical situation. What had appeared to be an easy victory had transformed into a desperate fight for survival. The human fleet, no longer on the defensive, surged forward with renewed purpose. Smaller craft darted between the asteroids with impossible precision, striking at Sarian vessels and then disappearing back into the field before Sarian gunners could lock onto them. Most disturbing was the human tactic with disabled Sarian ships. Rather than destroying them completely, the humans would cripple a vessel's engines and weapons, then allow it to drift. These drifting hulks became navigational hazards for other Sarian ships, forcing them to maneuver in increasingly constricted space. Jal watched in horror as one such disabled vessel, the cruiser, Imperative, was deliberately rammed by a human attack craft. The smaller vessel, its reactor deliberately set to overload, tore through the Imperative's hull and detonated deep inside. The resulting explosion ripped the cruiser apart, sending superheated fragments hurtling in all directions like shrapnel. damaging several nearby Sarian vessels. "They're using our own ships as weapons," Vex whispered, his scales pale with shock. The tide turned decisively when a squadron of human vessels, apparently on a suicide mission, broke through the Sarian defensive screen and headed directly for the command ships at the center of the formation. Zal's flagship, the Dominion's Claw, was their primary target. "All power to forward shields," Zal ordered. "Concentrate point defense on those vessels." The Sarian gunners downed 3 of the 5 approaching ships, but the remaining 2 slammed into the Dominion's Claw at full speed. One struck the main reactor section, causing catastrophic power fluctuations throughout the ship. The other crashed into the command tower itself. Zal was thrown from his chair as the bridge shuddered under the impact. Emergency force fields activated, preventing decompression, but fires erupted across the command deck. Through the chaos, he heard the damage control officer's report. "Main reactor containment failing. Hull breaches on decks 5 through 12. We're losing structural integrity." "Abandon ship," Zal ordered, the words bitter in his mouth. "All personnel to escape pods." As he evacuated with his surviving bridge crew, Zal witnessed the full extent of the disaster. The once proud Sarian fleet was in ruins. 8 senior commanders, including 3 admirals, had been killed when their flagships were targeted in similar suicide attacks. Over 600 vessels were severely damaged or destroyed outright. The Battle of Sol Belt, intended as a display of Sarian military might, had instead become their most humiliating defeat yet. Later, safe aboard a rescue vessel retreating from the Sol system, Zal attempted to understand what had happened. How had the humans transformed an entire asteroid field into a weapon? The planning, the resources, the coordination required were staggering. "The brutality wasn't in their firepower," he explained to the Sarian High Command during his debriefing. "It was in their willingness to sacrifice themselves. When we destroyed one of their ships, we became haunted by the knowledge that it might be deliberately steering toward us, ready to explode. Each victory felt poisonous to our morale. We began to believe that if we defeated them, they would only return with more vicious tactics." The psychological impact on Sarian forces was profound. For a warrior culture that valued honor and direct confrontation, the human approach to warfare seemed incomprehensible and terrifying. How could they fight an enemy that turned everything, even defeat, into a weapon? But the worst was yet to come. In the aftermath of the Sol system debacle, Sarian intelligence began to uncover evidence of an even more insidious human strategy: infiltration on a scale previously thought impossible. Throughout the 3 years of conflict, the human coalition had been conducting sophisticated information warfare. They released captured Sarian prisoners into what appeared to be standard detention facilities, but were actually genetic and psychological research centers. Every aspect of Sarian biology, psychology, and culture was studied in minute detail. Leading this effort was Lieutenant Colonel Amy Brooks, a human Special Forces commander whose name would become as feared among Sarians as Grandma Death herself. Brooks specialized in deep cover operations, organizing teams of operatives disguised as Sarian officers to infiltrate rear echelon installations. These infiltrators gathered intelligence on everything from ammunition supplies to communication codes to troop movements. Most remarkably, Brooks herself allowed capture on 3 separate occasions. Each time, she exploited her captivity to steal crucial data about Sarian security systems, military protocols, and command structures. She turned her imprisonment into training, studying guard rotations, memorizing facility layouts, identifying weaknesses in Sarian security procedures. After each inevitable escape, she distributed detailed manuals to resistance cells throughout human space, providing instructions on everything from bypassing Sarian locks to jamming Sarian communications to manufacturing improvised weapons effective against Sarian physiology. The impact of these operations was devastating. Within 6 months, Sarian reconnaissance and supply lines were compromised throughout the theater of operations. Human infiltrators had penetrated every level of the Sarian military establishment, from frontline units to the war command itself. As Jal summarized bitterly to the High Command, the Sarian fleet had nowhere to hide. Every plan was exposed before activation. The culmination of this intelligence war came in the most unexpected form: peace negotiations. After the catastrophic losses in the Sol system and the growing evidence of human infiltration throughout their military, the Sarian High Command reluctantly agreed to peace talks. The negotiations would take place on Harmony Prime, a neutral station maintained by the Galactic Council. The Sarians approached these talks from what they believed was a position of strength. Despite their setbacks, they still possessed vastly superior numbers and industrial capacity compared to the human coalition. Their list of demands reflected this confidence. The human coalition must surrender unconditionally, accepting Sarian authority over all human-controlled systems. Jal, as one of the few senior commanders to survive the recent campaigns, was selected to represent Sarian military interests at the negotiations. He expected to face a delegation of human officials, perhaps led by their civilian leadership, ready to plead for terms. Instead, the humans sent only Colonel Steve Hayes, a former field commander now serving as a diplomat. He arrived at Harmony Prime alone, without security or staff, carrying only a small briefcase. The main conference room on Harmony Prime was impressive by design. A circular chamber with high ceilings and transparent walls, offering spectacular views of surrounding space. The Sarian delegation occupied one side of the massive central table. Military officers, political representatives, and allied species observers. They presented a united, intimidating front. Hayes entered alone, nodding politely to the assembled Sarians. He was older than Jal had expected, his hair gray at the temples, his face weathered by decades of service. Yet, he moved with the confident grace of a career soldier, showing no sign of intimidation before the Sarian delegation. "Colonel Hayes," the Sarian chief negotiator began, "we are prepared to receive your terms of surrender." Hayes smiled, the same disconcerting smile that Jal had seen on Major Price's face before Kepler. 442b erupted in flames. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding," Hayes said calmly. "I'm not here to discuss our surrender." Before the Sarians could respond, Hayes opened his briefcase and began removing its contents. Photographs, data chips, holographic projectors. He arranged them methodically on the table before him. "What is the meaning of this?" the chief negotiator demanded. "Evidence," Hayes replied simply. He activated the first holographic projector. To the Sarian's shock, it displayed a perfect three-dimensional reproduction of the High Command's private strategy room on Sarian Prime, a facility so secure that most Sarians didn't know of its existence. The hologram showed the Sarian War Council in session, discussing classified battle plans for future campaigns against human worlds. "This meeting took place 3 days ago," Hayes explained. "You'll notice that General Kex is wearing his ceremonial medallion, the one he received last week for the subjugation of the Altair mining colony." The Sarian delegation fell silent, scales shifting to pale yellow, the color of extreme alarm in their species. Hayes activated another projector, displaying internal schematics for the latest Sarian dreadnought class, including details of the propulsion and weapon systems that were supposedly the Empire's most closely guarded secrets. "How did you obtain these?" Jal asked, his voice barely audible. "We have friends everywhere," Hayes replied. "Hospital nurses, ministerial assistants, ship engineers, perimeter guards, every diagram, every password, every conversation, we hear it all." As if to demonstrate, Hayes tapped a small communicator on his wrist. A real-time video feed appeared, showing a darkened city street. "This is happening right now on Loris 4, Hayes explained, naming a key Sarian ally world. "Half an hour ago, a Special Forces team of 10 operators cut power to the central grid. 5 major cities are currently without electricity, affecting approximately 2 million citizens. The Sarian chief negotiator stood abruptly. "This is outrageous. We deployed 3,000 ships against you, used nuclear weapons against your Saturn station. How could a mere dozen humans cause such disruption?" Hayes's expression remained calm, almost sympathetic. "We only need one chip, one virus, one team of volunteers," he said. "Sarians fight conventional battles with massive fleets and armies. We fight psychological warfare, network warfare, asymmetric warfare, conflicts that don't require 1,000 ships." He activated additional projectors, displaying dispersal maps across Sarian territory. Each point of light represented a human operative or cell, positioned near critical Sarian infrastructure, power plants, communication hubs, water treatment facilities, atmospheric processors. "Each warship in our fleet contains perhaps 10 humans," Hayes continued. "Their mission isn't to engage your military directly. It's to map vulnerabilities, from storm network control rooms to biological species susceptible to targeted pathogen X-47. The implications were clear. The humans didn't need to win pitched battles or control territory. They had positioned themselves to attack the infrastructure that made Sarian civilization possible. In that moment, Jal understood with perfect clarity that the traditional Sarian strengths, unity, technological prowess, massive fleets, no longer provided any meaningful advantage. The room fell into stunned silence as the Sarian delegation grappled with this revelation. Hayes allowed the silence to stretch, then spoke in a quiet, measured tone that somehow carried more weight than any shout could have. "End the war. Humanity doesn't want to dominate anyone. We simply want the freedom to survive. We've demonstrated our ability to cripple any planet in your empire without resorting to nuclear weapons. If the Sarian leadership insists on continuing hostilities, we will bring the war to the heart of Cathar itself, to your homeworlds, to your families, to your children." Jal felt a tremor run through his body, not of fear, but of recognition. In that moment, he understood that he and the entire Sarian race had been comprehensively outmaneuvered. The past 3 years hadn't been a border conflict or even a conventional war. They had been an elaborate test, designed by humans to analyze Sarian weaknesses in forensic detail. And the Sarians had failed that test catastrophically. The peace terms, when finally negotiated, reflected this new reality. The Sarian Empire was forced to recognize the human coalition as an autonomous, sovereign power. The Galactic Council formally acknowledged humans as equal partners in all common security arrangements. For the proud Sarian military, the concessions were bitter medicine. Senior commanders, including Jal himself, were required to resign their commissions and accept responsibility for the irreparable damage inflicted on territories that would now be permanently ceded to human control. The aftermath within Sarian territory was chaotic. Military units, accustomed to clear hierarchies and unquestioned orders, found themselves adrift in a new reality where their leadership had been discredited and their invincibility disproven. The psychological impact was profound, especially when human coalition peacekeepers arrived to monitor compliance with the treaty terms. "They walked among us like tourists," Jal later recalled, laughing and chatting casually, as if victory had been nothing more than an amusing game. Perhaps most humiliating was the repatriation of Sarian war dead. The medical corps struggled to process remains that were often unidentifiable, not because of battle damage, but because humans had learned enough about Sarian biology to modify the bodies at a genetic level, inserting tracking devices or biological markers that would have allowed them to monitor Sarian activities indefinitely. Jal returned to his homeworld of Tarsia, no longer a military commander, but a civilian attempting to rebuild a life from the ruins of his career. The city around him bore the scars of human infiltration, sabotaged infrastructure, contaminated water supplies, medical facilities compromised by surveillance devices designed to catalog Sarian genetic vulnerabilities. In quiet moments, looking out over the scarred landscape of his once proud world, Jal found himself returning to the same question. We asked ourselves if humans were strong. Now I see. They aren't the strongest species in raw power. They simply never fear death. He compiled his observations into a journal, eventually submitted to the Galactic Council as a warning to other species. Never assume that we, Sarians, represent the pinnacle of galactic civilization. There exists a species that will shatter the universe itself to protect even the smallest rock, the tiniest grain of soil. The crimson sunset over Tarsha seemed to reflect his mood. Like a planet taking its final resilient breath before fragmenting. Jal stepped into the gathering shadows, uncertain what future awaited his people. One thing alone he knew with certainty. Humanity will continue to refine warfare as an art form, and the galaxy would never be the same. As Dr. Lyra Voss concluded her interview with Commander Jal Aruk aboard Harmony Prime, she deactivated the recording device and gathered her notes. The veteran's testimony would become part of the official historical record, a cautionary tale for future generations about the dangers of underestimating an apparently weaker adversary. Outside the station's reinforced windows, the eternal stars continued their dance, indifferent to the rise and fall of empires. But somewhere in that vast darkness, humanity prepared, ever vigilant, ever adapting, ready for whatever threat might next test their resolve. They had learned, perhaps better than any species in the galaxy, that survival often depends not on being the strongest, but on being the most willing to sacrifice for freedom. And that was a lesson the Sarians and the rest of the galaxy would not soon forget.